समान नागरिक संहिता उत्तराखंड 2024 विधेयक को पारित किया जाए। जो माननीय सदस्य इसके पक्ष में हो कृपया हाँ कहें। हाँ की संख्या अधिक है, अतः विधेयक पारित हुआ।
With this, a monumental step was taken by the Uttarakhand Legislative Assembly, becoming the first state in India to pass its Uniform Civil Code, or UCC. One common legislation that will override different personal laws. Controversial idea that comes with a lot of historical baggage. The idea of Uniform Civil Code was debated at length by the drafters of our constitution due to its implications for people of different religions. B.R. Ambedkar, the architect of the constitution, was of the view of having a voluntary code that is not imposed on the citizens. It was finally included as a directive principle under Article 44 of the Constitution, which stipulates that the state shall endeavour to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. But none of the successive governments touched the issue for the fear of polarizing the vote bank. With BJP gaining power at the centre, UCC slowly came out of the curtains from being just a manifesto and poll promise and now becoming a hotly discussed implementable agenda.
1950 से हमारे हर घोषणा पत्र में है कि हम यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड को लाएंगे। किसी भी पंथ निरपेक्ष राष्ट्र के अंदर सभी धर्म के नागरिकों के लिए समान कानून होना चाहिए, कानून धर्म के आधार पर नहीं होना चाहिए।
From Amit Shah to PM Modi, the word from the centre was clear about the need for a UCC.
यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड के नाम पर ऐसे लोगों को भड़काने का काम हो रहा है। आप मुझे बताइए, एक घर में परिवार के एक सदस्य के लिए एक कानून हो, परिवार के दूसरे सदस्य के लिए दूसरा कानून हो, तो क्या वो घर चल पाएगा क्या? फिर ऐसी दोहरी व्यवस्था से देश कैसे चल पाएगा?
यूसीसी ये संविधान का एजेंडा है। आर्टिकल 44 में संविधान निर्माताओं ने देश के विधानमंडल और संसद को कहा है कि जब भी अनुकूल समय आए इस देश में यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड होना चाहिए।
And this agenda found backing in many Supreme Court rulings that reminded lawmakers that the provision for a UCC in the Constitution has remained unexplored. So the first big attempt was made in 2016 with the 21st Law Commission seeking responses from the public and publishing its paper in 2018. And now, with the general elections just round the corner, a small hill state of Uttarakhand, which hosts just about 1% of the country's population, has become the test ground of the UCC. And the opposition isn't enthused.
समान सिविल संहिता बनाने का प्रयास तो वर्णित है, लेकिन इसे थोपने का नहीं।
तो ये जो बातें इसलिए आ रही हैं क्योंकि इन्हें बेरोजगारी, महंगाई, सरकार के काम जमीन पे है ही नहीं।
Uttarakhand doesn't have too many minorities. The challenge is going to be to take the interests of all groups in a diverse and plural society into account.
The Law Commission should have come out with the working paper or defined what is UCC. You're just asking views.
उत्तराखंड के चुनाव के पहले एक समिति बनाई। उत्तराखंड का चुनाव जीतने के बाद अब वो समिति अपने घर चली गई। अब गुजरात के चुनाव के 3 दिन पहले एक समिति बनाई, अब ये भी चुनाव के बाद अपने घर चली जाएगी। मध्य प्रदेश में क्यों नहीं बनाते? उत्तर प्रदेश में क्यों नहीं बनाते? अगर इनकी नीयत यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड लागू करने की है तो देश में क्यों नहीं बनाते? देश में लागू कर देंगे।
But today on the morning brief, we cut through the political noise and deep dive into understanding the controversial UCC. How does the Uttarakhand UCC impact its citizens, their families and the society?
The first is marriage and divorce. Number 2 is that it deals with children, that is legitimacy of children. The third thing that it deals with is succession.
What are the gaps that can't be ignored?
There was a lot of opportunity to really further the ideas of gender equality and secularism,
which we find missing now, which is a disappointment.
The criticism that can be raised is the fact that perhaps it's not fully uniform, but I also think uniformity is not a stroke of pen solution that can happen overnight.
For that matter, does India really need a UCC?
Courts actually been made very key interventions on behalf of Uniform Civil Code and in judgment after judgment.
And is Uttarakhand's UCC the first step towards a mega constitutional reform?
I feel that there will be quite a bit of litigation. This is not the last word on the Uniform Civil Code. I mean, it's barely the first word. This is the beginning of a long journey.
I speak to legal eagles Dushyant Dave, Orgo Sen Gupta and Mihira Sood, and also get insights from my ET colleague Anubhuti Vishnoy, who has been closely tracking this issue for years. It is Tuesday, February 13th from the Economic Times. I am your host Kiran Somvanshi, and this is the Morning Brief. With 392 sections and 7 schedules, the Uniform Civil Code of Uttarakhand is a long piece of legislation. But by bureaucratic standards, it was a fairly short journey of just 2 years for the UCC to turn from being just a poll promise to being passed as a legislation. The UCC plan was announced by the BJP Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami in February 2022. A 5-member panel was formed to draft the code in May 22. And by September of that year, the panel invited suggestions from stakeholders. It received 2.3 lakh suggestions from people across the state. The bill has been drawn from similar laws enacted in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, France, Nepal, Germany, Japan, Canada, and Azerbaijan. The draft bill was submitted to the government on 2nd of this month, tabled in the Assembly on the 6th, and passed by a voice vote in the Assembly on 7th. That was fast, right? But technically, Uttarakhand isn't the first state to implement UCC in India.
Goa is the first state in the country to have a uniform civil code, but that is a legacy of Portuguese rule. Unlike the rest of the country, they were under Portuguese colonial rule where their civil code was being followed very uniformly across religions. Of course, they gave latitude here and there, but a uniform civil code has been there in Goa forever.
That's my colleague Anubhuti Vishnoy, senior editor at the Economic Times. But before we jump on to more about UCC, let's first understand what does a UCC deal with from Orgo Sen Gupta, founder and research director at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy.
Uniform Civil Code primarily deals with 3 aspects. The first is marriage and divorce. How do you get married? What is a valid marriage? What are the grounds for divorce? Where do you go for filing a petition for divorce? Number 1. Number 2 is that it deals with children. That is legitimacy of children, how do you adopt children, guardianship of children, relationship between parents and children. That's the second thing that it deals with. The third thing that it deals with is succession. And by succession, it's about both writing wills, so which is called testamentary succession, as well as if someone dies without a will, what happens to their property. That is called intestate succession. So broadly speaking, any uniform civil code or family law reforms code deals with these 3 aspects of marriage, children, and succession.
But as I said, there is a lot of historical baggage attached to the idea of a uniform civil code, as Anubhuti points out.
This is a debate which opened pre-independence when Constituent Assembly subcommittee started looking at it in 1947. The whole issue on uniform civil code opened right there and then. It opened up to a divided house. Even then, you had stalwarts like Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Meenu Masani. They were backing a uniform civil code. Dr. Ambedkar himself was in favor of a uniform civil code. And then there was another section which thought that this was too much interference into personal laws and religious beliefs. So the UCC issue in 1947 itself, prior to even framing of the constitution, became cast as a Hindu-Muslim issue as well, right there and then. So by the time it went into the constitution, it could not go into as a fundamental right. It is part of the directive principles of state policy in Article 44, which says the state shall endeavor to bring in a uniform civil code in the country. It is desirable. So that is how it started. But the watershed moment was 1985 when the Shah Bano judgment came in. And that is where the big debate, UCC and its applicability on all religions began as we know it today. And those are pain points even today. And it became even further ossified into a very strong Hindu-Muslim issue and a demand for equal laws across religions. Since then, it has been a very big electoral and ideological agenda for the BJP.
And it comes right ahead of the general elections a few months away. In fact, the Uttarakhand UCC rollout can well be a test case before a national rollout. How do you see it?
It is very interesting politically and electorally. I will say that a very small hill state is setting the template for a national level uniform civil code. Fascinating in itself, and the BJP has chose to pilot this very significant legislation from this small state, which nobody thought was the biggest or the most important of states in the BJP scheme of things. Next month, we go into Lok Sabha elections. Politically, it is perfectly timed. I would say for the BJP, it also creates a debate everywhere. Every state is talking about it. You have the Assam Chief Minister talking about it. You have Gujarat talking about it. Rajasthan planning its own committee. So it sets the stage for a very big move on UCC at the national level.
So what are the kind of hits and misses as far as the code is concerned?
The hits also predictable. The polygamy ban, equal property rights is a big one. Now Hindus got it through the 2005 Act and subsequent Supreme Court orders. A Hindu woman has equal property rights now as a man. But in case of Islam, which was actually progressive initially, where you get half of your brother's property rights by the Sharia. But now the Muslim woman will also get is equal property rights, 50% between siblings. So that's a big one. The polygamy ban, that you cannot marry while your wife is alive, or you have to get a divorce. That is a big hit. Arguably, politically, you can see it this way or that. One good progressive thing that they've done, that there is no illegitimization of any child, and the child's best interest has been put in the code in case of custody also. There is clarity on registration of marriage, equal and same grounds for divorce. So that is in place. The misses, if we look at, one of the biggest ones which you will see critics of Uttarakhand UCC talk about is the Hindu undivided family issue. The male heir in the Hindu undivided family has co-partnership rights, which are higher than a woman. A woman doesn't have it. Now, this was debated initially, we know, in the committee, Uttarakhand Civil Code Committee, that maybe we should do away with that. And politically, it is difficult to do that because basically HUF is in the income tax context. So it will upset a lot of taxation balance for the whole Hindu community. So the committee and the bill does not touch HUF issue at all. It is an omission. And they have said it is for the center to legislate that. Now, we don't know if the national level UCC bill, when it comes, will it look at that or not? But yes, this is a glaring blind spot. We'll have to see how that is addressed later, but it is not there in the Uttarakhand bill. Then also the whole issue of exempting tribals is there, which is also debatable now. We know that Schedule 6 of the Constitution does allow tribal states to govern and live as per their customary laws. So the moment the UCC was talked about last year nationally, all the tribal states, most of them strongly opposed it. And Uttarakhand, which has 2.9% tribal population, I'm not sure if there was such a big opposition here, but polygamy and polyandry has been practiced in Uttarakhand's tribal population earlier. It's not rampant, but it is there in customs. So the final bill that Uttarakhand has tabled in the past gives a clear exemption to all tribal communities. Then there were other issues, more progressive aspects that the committee we know was looking at and did seek public feedback on. One was using more progressive language in the bill, which we find missing now. For instance, using the term spouse instead of husband and wife. Now that has been dropped entirely in the final bill. So there was a chance to, make it a more progressive bill in 2024 when you are there. So they missed that one. They were looking at some mechanism to ensure the social security for aging parents, which does become a problem in the hill state when, the huge migration is there in a state like this. So older people are left fending for themselves alone. They're also very ghost villages, what are called, almost emptied out of population because people move to cities and plains for work. So that is another miss or mess. I do not know what the live-in relationship segment is because, yes, the committee was debating it. And it was incidentally and interestingly, there was a lot of public feedback on live-in relationships in Uttarakhand and a lot of anger also. And most people felt that there was a lot of illegality going in the name of live-in relationships. There was extortion, blackmail, crime. You and I have heard of incidents also. So that was, I think, playing very, very strongly in this public feedback. There's a lot of demand for compulsory registration kind of a system. While the panel was earlier looking at a self-disclosure regime, not so intrusive, but the final version of what we are seeing in the bill seems very much in your bedroom, really. So all those issues that they've set the cat among the pigeons. And so we will see how that one goes. It could go into courts. We do not know what will happen with that.
I turn to Orgo Sen Gupta to understand the legality of a state passing its own civil code.
The fact that a state has drafted it is also constitutionally permissible because states can draft legislation of this kind. and the constitution did exhort states to do it as well, but will lead to several implementational challenges because we are talking about marriages that happen between people who are resident in Uttarakhand and people who are resident outside. So how will the rules govern that kind of marriage? Succession of property, adoption of children. These are all issues that in some sense are national. So it will lead to some implementational challenges, but we should not be surprised by this development.
Right. But is personal law per se is a state subject, national subject? Is it in the concurrent list? Where does it come to?
Yeah, so it is a concurrent list subject that both the center and the state are competent constitutionally to legislate on. So legally speaking, Uttarakhand is well within its rights to do what it has done. But it is a change because we usually have central legislations governing this issue, whether it is the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act or the Indian Succession Act for property succession or the Guardian and Wards Act and Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act for children. So we've had central legislations governing it. This does mark a change from that.
And later on, when India supposedly actually rolls out a UCC, then how will it apply on Uttarakhand if it differs from the national code?
I think when India rolls out and if it rolls out a UCC at any point of time, then according to a established legal doctrine, that will be considered an occupied field. So that means with any concurrent list subject, if the union has legislated on the issue and has occupied that field, then the rest of the state legislations will wither away and don't have any legal effect. So essentially, then this Uttarakhand code will cease to have any legal effect, and the uniform civil code, that is the national code, if and when that happens, will be the governing law.
Yeah, the fact that the Uttarakhand code doesn't include the application of it to the tribals and the fact that HUF has not been touched. So how do you see that? How uniform is it?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the criticism that can be raised is the fact that perhaps it's not fully uniform. But I also think uniformity is not a stroke of pen solution that can happen overnight. It's something that will take time and is a gradual process. Certainly, as far as the exclusion to tribals is concerned, it's understandable given the fact that they worked in a very short period of time of 2 years. And I feel that this is a political call that has been taken. At the end of the day, as in if we go back in history and see where the scheduled tribes idea comes from, denotified tribes that existed earlier, which is in some sense a colonial construct as well. So at some point of time, I think there needs to be greater inclusion and participation to see what kind of baseline principles persons belonging to scheduled tribes also can agree to without necessarily affecting their autonomy excessively. So that's kind of work in progress that needs to be done over the course of the next 2 or 3 decades. The second point, in terms of the HUF, I think this is one area where there is going to be quite a bit of litigation, to be honest. They couldn't have done something to the HUF because the HUF is a legal category that is created by the Income Tax Act. So the HUF is essentially something that the union legislation, the union parliament has created. So they couldn't really have touched that. But as far as co-partnery property is concerned, which is, for the sake of your listeners, it's essentially property that belongs to the HUF, that is undivided Hindu family and the property that they own in common. It's a little unclear currently in this act as to what is happening to co-partnery property, because the way the act is written, it seems that all property is personal property, so it belongs to me and to you and to everyone as an individual. So it's not exactly clear what's happening to co-partnery. So I feel that there will be quite a bit of litigation, but this actually points to a larger issue, which is that this is not the last word on the Uniform Civil Code. I mean, it's barely the first word. This is the beginning of a long journey. And I think that it will be a while before we get to something that is even remotely uniform and implementable in India.
But do you see more states now latching on to this whole idea and rolling out their own codes?
Yeah, I think that is bound to happen. In fact, I think Assam and Gujarat have also said that they've done it. They are contemplating it, and that's bound to happen. And my sense is that organically, over a period of time, many states might want to jump onto this bandwagon, but we'll have to see. I'm not sure whether they will do it and what shape or form that it will take.
And what do you think, the other states who are toying with this idea, what care should they take when they kind of conceptualize their codes?
I think the first thing that should really be thought about, and the two things that I think are gaps that currently exist in what Uttarakhand has done. The first is that they haven't dealt with provisions relating to adoption and guardianship at all. Okay, so they have one laudatory provision, which is that they have done away with the concept of illegitimacy. So if there is a child that is born out of wedlock, then in that case, the child is still considered to be legitimate for the purposes of succession. This is good because why would you blame the child? But they haven't gone into questions of adoption and guardianship. So that's a case where they haven't even touched it. So it's not uniform at this point of time. And I think future states will have to apply their mind to what they want to do there. The second is, as far as testamentary succession is concerned, unfortunately, the Uttarakhand government and parliament's legislature seem to have almost verbatim copied the Indian Succession Act of 1925. So that is a colonial era legislation that in great detail talks about wills and how they can be executed and how they can't. In my view, that is a completely defunct legislation that is completely unsuited for 21st century India. And this is the reason why this bill has become so long, because 200 of these sections are also essentially copy-pasted from the Indian Succession Act, including examples that talk about mariners and airmen and all these terms which have become fairly antiquated at this point of time. So I think any future state that is looking into these issues, as it should really look at provisions in relation to adoption and guardianship, taking also from the Juvenile Justice Act that exists. And secondly, on how to make a will. Let's have some simple provisions as to how to make a will that is valid and executable, which court I have to go to, and how to make that process work quickly. I think that should really be the focus of any future state that is seriously looking at a UCC. They can consider this in some form a base draft, but I do hope that they apply their minds to it and can improve this, particularly by doing away with these deficiencies I point.
While other states have much to emulate, the courts in India have time and again played a key role in shaping the debate on UCC, as Anubhuti tells me.
Have actually made very key interventions on behalf of Uniform Civil Code and in judgment after judgment. So we talked about 1985 Shah Banu, of course. Across religions, there are very interesting court orders where UCC has been talked about. Like there is 1984 Jordan Diango versus SS Chopra, where a Christian woman is married to a Sikh man and seeks nullification of her marriage. But she was not being granted a degree of separation because the Indian Divorce Act did not allow for it. So then again, the court has said that this is a sorry state of affairs. A woman has to go through this. The UCC should be alive and kicking. Why is it not there? Then there's a landmark 1995 Sarla Mudgal versus Union of India, where, her husband had attempted to solemnize a second marriage after converting to Islam. So here again, the Supreme Court ruled that marriage without dissolution of the first would be void. But in the absence of UCC, open inducement was allowed through these provisions. People would convert and do that. So there again, the court said there is no necessary connection between religion and personal law in a civilized society. There is religious freedom under Article 25, but Article 44 is looking at divesting religion from social relations and personal law. Marriage, succession should be of a secular character. Then in 2014 itself, you had the Shabnam Hashmi case, the famous social activist. She moved court to adopt a child because the Muslim law did not allow her to do it. And that is because we have the Juvenile Justice Act now. The court said that you are well within your rights to do it. Then you have 2020 case in anonymous ABC versus the state of Delhi, where a single unwed Christian mother wanted to be designated as the sole guardian of her child, but she was not being allowed to. Supreme Court finally overturned the Delhi High Court order and allowed her to do so. Remember, the court has made many, many interventions on the behalf of UCC and moved by people's petitions and pleas. And the interesting part, as I pointed out to you, is mostly women moving it. They, across religions, seem to be at the bottom of the ladder of justice. And it is they who get most affected by this. The question which arises and is the most important one is, does the Uttarakhand UCC really bring gender justice, which was the whole aim across religions? And does it put the child at the center, the marginalized segments, when we talk about minorities, women, tribals, children? Are you giving them a fair playing field?
And to seek answers to these questions, I turn to lawyer Mihira Sood, who is the director of the Center for Child Rights and Juvenile Justice.
I actually describe this UCC as a missed opportunity. as someone who has supported the idea of a UCC for a very long time, there was a lot of opportunity to really further the ideas of gender equality and secularism in a way that you could really foreground and entrench those ideas. And the wording of this UCC, some of the provisions of it, seems to betray the feeling that that is not the intent. Gender equality and secularism, despite what is being said, do not seem to be the guiding factors behind this code, and that's a disappointment. For example, it copies the provision from the Hindu Marriage Act that the minimum age of marriage for men is 21 and for women is 18. Why is there this differential age? If you were looking so hard at gender equality, then why didn't you think about what this means and why are you continuing with a provision like this? You still have provisions like restitution of conjugal rights. Again, these point to a very outdated, stereotypical idea of marriage, marital roles, and gender roles within a marriage. And you also have very limited grounds of divorce. And here is where I think, for example, we could have taken more from Muslim personal law and incorporated it here, because I think when it comes to divorce and treating marriage as a contract where both parties have to be of one mind in order to consent to a marriage, and if either party changes its mind, then the marriage is dead and there's nothing left in it, is a much more progressive and rational view than what the Hindu Marriage Act has always had, which is treating marriage as a sacrament. A woman can get married at the age of 18 without her parents' permission. She's treated as an adult for the purposes of marriage. But till the age of 21, any notice of a live-in relationship has to be sent to her parents. So this really speaks to the infantilization of women in particular, when treating them as incapable of making their own decisions with respect to who they wish to spend their life with and in what form. So yes, I do think that the Uniform Civil Code of Uttarakhand does not go far enough on these fronts, but it does broadly go a step further.
The big question amidst all this is whether India needs a uniform civil code, and legal experts are divided in their opinions. Senior advocate Dushyant Dave has this to say.
In our sense, you can say uniform civil code is necessary. But I think we are trying to do it. Supreme Court declared triple talaq unconstitutional. So part of that was an effort to help Muslim women who are victims of this kind of a practice, which is not desirable practice. So far as polygamy is concerned, it's something which really by passage of time has virtually died. I don't think there are many Muslims in this country who can afford to have more than one wife. So really speaking, this argument that they have a right to have 4 wives is really, according to me, a non-starter. So really, barring these areas, I don't think there are any areas where really there was any need for a uniform civil code, as Dr. Ambedkar, and the greatest of all Indians ever born is Dr. Ambedkar. He felt that it was there practically. I would therefore say that the need for uniform civil code really does not arise today. And even if you want to impose something on the Muslim minority, you should bring about some kind of a consent, some kind of a consensus, so that they don't feel that they are being attacked so far as their religious freedom is concerned.
Orgo Sen Gupta from Vidhi Center for Legal Policy has a different take.
I'm broadly in support of the fact that there should be a common or a uniform civil code for the country. At the same time, I should caveat it by saying that the uniform civil code should not be a Hindu law in disguise, right? If it's Hindu law in disguise, then it's not a uniform civil code. But why do I say that I broadly support a uniform civil code? So about 150 years back, India did not have a uniform criminal code, right? There were different laws governing on crime, depending on whether you followed Hindu customs or Islamic customs or other customs. So the fact is that today, 150 years later, it would be unthinkable to say that crimes would be treated differently if you were Hindu or you were Muslim. It kind of shocks our conscience if you were to think like that. And I think why should it be any different for matters relating to succession, property, which are essentially matters relating to civil law? The customs that have developed over a period of time certainly, have been existed for a long period of time. But in a modern 21st century state, we can think of what those baseline regulations should be, where the state has an interest. At the end of the day, if two people want to get married to each other, the only interest that a state should have is to ensure that the two persons are adults, number one. That number two, it is a consensual marriage that they are entering into. The state really doesn't have any other interest. So the only thing that a code should do is to say that there should be registration of those marriages. Now, beyond that, whether you want to marry by entering into a nikah-nama or doing a saptapadi or exchanging some vows in church, that is entirely your matter. That is something the state does not have anything to do with. So I think a simple baseline document which governs uniform and standard principles relating to marriage, succession, and adoption is something that I support. But as I've said, this must be inclusive, it must be participatory, it cannot essentially be the customs of one religion that now become a uniform civil code. And I must say that Uttarakhand hasn't done that. Broadly speaking, they have tried at something that is a kind of baseline code.
And lawyer Mihira Sood also has an interesting take on UCC.
I think a UCC is a rational, modern way forward, frankly. I do believe that. As I said, I think genuine freedom of religion, unfortunately in our country, freedom of religion is seen as freedom of communities to practice their own religion. I think genuine freedom of religion should be freedom of individuals. It needs to percolate down to the individual level. Individuals should be free to practice their own religion, to leave the religion of their birth, to marry or cohabit with a person of another religion, to form their own religious beliefs that may or may not find any community standing. I think religion really needs to be recast from a collective matter to an individual matter. And the UCC is a good way of doing that.
Over 1 billion people, 8 major religions, and multiple tribes and customs. Clearly, rolling out a uniform civil code in India is not a simple ask or task. A reason why it has not been done for so long despite a constitutional provision. A central government enjoying a strong majority can very well push through the rolling out of a uniform civil code. But there are challenges of how to maintain pluralism while pushing for uniformity and how to not alienate the minorities. Besides, the Uniform Civil Code has to be uniform in spirit and implementation. It cannot be a Hindu law in disguise. In that case, it is likely to be seen as a populist, politically motivated, and majoritarian move. A strong government can rather roll out a uniform code, taking all communities together through consensus building to avoid fomenting societal disharmony. Besides, a uniform personal law code cannot become too personal with issues like registration of live-in relationships. It will not go down well with the younger generation and can very well be misused. And most importantly, simply rolling out a uniform civil code by a country can do little if the social norms don't change and society doesn't become progressive. As senior advocate Dushyant Dave said,
and women have suffered the most, undoubtedly, be it the Muslim woman or even a Hindu woman. They have suffered. And those injustices have to be corrected by us. But that requires a societal change. Our approach has to change. We have to start accepting that women are equal. And unless we do that, this is not going to change. Laws are not going to. You have brought, amendment to Hindu Succession Act and said that daughter will have an equal share. Hardly any brother or much less any mother is willing to give a daughter equal share. India lives in villages. And it is impossible for us to take our laws and our courts into those villages to do justice.
So even a uniform civil code will have a practical sanctity only till people actually change their ways and follow it. So that's it for today. This is Kiran Somanchi from the Economic Times, and you are listening all about Uniform Civil Code only on the Morning Brief. A special thank you to Dushyant Dave, Orgo Sen Gupta, Mihira Sood and Anubhuti Vishnoi for sharing their amazing insights. My colleague Vinay Joshi produced the episode and Rajas Nayak worked up the sound magic. TMB's executive producers are Anupriya Nair, Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Barman. Thank you for listening. And if you like this episode, do spread the word. A new episode of the Morning Brief podcast drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Don't miss it. It streams on all audio platforms like Amazon Prime Music, JioSaavn, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. And of course, ET's own audio platform, ET Play. Have a wonderful week ahead. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.